real happy to be here today, and I hope you will have that kind of experience before. So, can't hear me.
Is the mic turned on?
How's that? Hey! I'm going to tell you a little bit about my birth. It was Sunday morning, October the 1st, 1922, in Honeybrook, Pennsylvania. When the church bells were ringing, I still had head noises. But every birthday, my mother would go into that, and I've always respected it and laughed at it. We moved to Lansdale in April of 1927. I was 4.5 years old. One of the first people I met after a few days was Bob Roussel, who lived right across the street. We were on South Broad Street, Lansdale. And he would sit on the curb, and I would sit on the curb. Bob's right here. And we would pick pebbles up and throw them out in the trolley track. And eventually we got to know each other, and we've been thicker than thieves all those years. That's a long time, 27 to 2000 plus. I'd also like to refer to two other great friends of mine, and I learned just a week ago, that one of the posts over in Norristown apparently is dedicated to Ray S. Musselman. Anybody know of the Musselman family?
They make applesauce.
Hmm?
They make applesauce.
You might say that of this before we're through. And also Richard Henry Schlottman. Ray S. Musselman's full name is Horatio Shaw Seltzer Musselman. I will be back to them. Went through the entire program in Lansdale, 12 years. I graduated with the class of 1940. We had some great football teams at that period. We had wonderful coaches and great leaders, and I think all of that hopefully wore off on a lot of people, that they could pass that on, particularly in the Army years. We also had wonderful coaches. I was awarded a football scholarship at Gettysburg College, and went there the coming year, which was 1940. I slaved at Gettysburg. I didn't know anything but doctor, lawyer, dentist, and I chose being a doctor. Pre-med. I had 3 or 4 labs during the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, each 3 hours, and then football practice, and then track practice. And I was really, really, really a tired guy. When I get back to the fraternity, which was Phi Gamma Delta, I would eat dinner, run upstairs, go to bed, and then wake up about 2 o'clock in the morning. So I got the name Spook, because anytime anybody woke up, I would be awake. While at Gettysburg, I was in the ROTC, Reserve Officers Training Corps, and in 1942, all of us registered for the Army. It was wonderful. We had a wonderful sergeant that did most of the work with us, and we also had a captain at that time. I would have gotten a commission at school, as all the seniors did, but I happened to be a junior at that time, and so it was decided that all of us juniors would take basic training, and that was a godsend, believe me. Let's see here. On December the 4th, 1941. I happened to be down in the living room of our fraternity, and the president was on the air. The day of he came on, and I'm sure those of you who were living at that time can almost recite what he said, but he said, "Today is a day of infamy." The president of the college called a meeting of we only had 625 people at Gettysburg in those days, a meeting, and allowed that all of us were frozen, whatever that meant. The very next February, we went out to the train station and said goodbye to all of the freshmen and sophomores, except those who were not physically able to go into the Army. And that was one cold, miserable day. I find that what happened on September the 11th, which everyone is familiar with, had an aura of patriotism that you haven't seen for a long time. We didn't see, at least I didn't, during the Korean War, and certainly not Vietnam. Those people who were in the service in those years, from my humble opinion, we have a lot to be grateful for that they did what they did, because it was a rotten atmosphere from where I stood. Not that that rocks the world. I could have finished pre-med, I think. I had grades that were pretty good, maybe not. But I wanted to go, and everyone I knew wanted to go. I know guys who came back, finished school, and became doctors who saw a lot of combat in the infantry. I have a picture here. There were 18 of us in ROTC. Whoops. I think I'll pass it around, and you can look at it. But these 18 are all people from Gettysburg. Inside here, there's a little pull-up thing. I'm thinking maybe you might know somebody. Maybe you know Dr. Raffensperger in Ambler. Dr. Bucher was a doctor, or a dentist rather, in Lansdale. Ray Musselman is here. So if you care, you might pass that around too. Well, the day came when we had to go in the Army. We all went for physicals, and I bring Ray Musselman back into this picture. We were over, I forgot where we were, but anyway, that's terrible. It should be fresh in my mind. What I'm going to say is fresh in my mind. We were all naked as jaybirds, going from doctor to doctor to doctor, getting shots on both sides and that sort of thing. And Ray came up to this one doctor, and he wasn't observing what was going on. The doctor said, "I hope you don't mind this." He said, "Soldier, bend over, spread your cheeks." And he does that, and he goes, "Ah! So help me God." And it broke us up. Up to that point, we were pretty scared of everybody that had a uniform on, because we didn't really know what was going on, although, on the other hand, we knew a lot about tactics, we knew a lot about weapons, we knew how to march, we knew how to give commands with 3 years of ROTC. Well, from there, we went down to Fort McClellan, Alabama by train. It was not a freight train like we did over in Europe. We landed at Fort McClellan, Alabama, and prayed from the train to the kitchen. It was time to eat. And everybody started to look at one another and started to chirp. And eventually, in the mess hall, it got extremely noisy, and the first sergeant comes in, and he's a big bruiser. He says, "At ease, at ease. This is a place of reverence, and God damn it, we're going to keep it that way." We were quiet from there on. We had a wonderful cadre there. Captain Chappell, when we'd go on a march, he would wear a backpack and put 6 bricks in it. And we did a lot of marching. Our basic mission there was to learn heavy weapons. Heavy weapons are 81 millimeter mortars, 30 caliber water-cooled machine guns, and air-cooled machine guns. And since there were 18 of us, we had 4 platoons of 4 squadjeets. That's 16. Each of us immediately was made a squad leader, so we knew how to parade, we knew how to yell at each other, and there were the 2 over became what they call platoon guides. No particular choice, but that worked great because we whipped our troops into shape in good time. We started out with a 13-week program, but it was stretched to 14 and then eventually to 17. So we had some extra time in there.
Would the owner of a green Honda, license plate number EPR 3162, please move your car? It's in the fire lane. Again, green Honda, license number EPR 3162. Please move your car. Thank you.
So they decided to have a boxing team. Each battalion would have a boxing team, and Dr. Booker and I weighed exactly the same. He was a little taller than I, so he had to move up 1, and I've got a guy from Tennessee who was nothing more than a windmill. He just looked like he was swinging the stroke when he boxed. Dr. Booker got a guy who had 18 professional fights, and it was brutal. So there's 2 more weeks to go, and what did they do? They dreamed up a maneuver. I'm not criticizing, because this was almost like combat. And we went out in the area called Talladega, which is famous today for racing, I believe. What a scene that was. One of the guys, I've forgotten how they gave the commands and all that at that point, but it was a tactical thing, and we were trying to find people and that sort of thing. And one guy was running across a field and fell down and immediately was bitten by a copperhead. And Dr. Booker comes to the rescue, and he runs back to camp, where he ran to some place where he could get medical help, which was incredible. And he was a great athlete. I always look at heavy weapons as, for those of us in the infantry who were in that area, got a lifesaver. I feel that way today, because most of the infantry officers that I knew got hit, got either killed or wounded. When we finished our basic training, we were in wonderful condition. Everybody could do 51-hand push-ups, which try that someday. And we ran and we marched, and 25-mile marks were commonplace. Okay. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. Okie dokie. So what do you do with us now? We are supposed to go to OCS, we who had the 3 years of ROTC, but there wasn't any room for us at Fort Benning. So what do? They put us on a train. Well, they sent us home for a short leave, and then they sent us to New York City. We were on 137th Street at CCNY, and all we did was play. We ran the town all over the place. You couldn't buy, if you were interested in having a drink, and most soldiers are. The people there were just fabulous. They were all for anybody in the uniform. None of our guys had any trouble, and we were riding the subways most of the night. After that, they still had no room for us at Fort Benning, and they thought maybe we were in danger of what we were doing. They sent us to VPI, Virginia Polytech Institute, which is now Virginia Tech. Great school, wonderful school, in Blacksburg, Virginia. Played football there, and the guy cold-cocked me. We never had baskets on our face. He knocked me silly, and I had to give it up, gladly, if anybody cares. We continued classes. It was math, biology, chemistry, history, whatever. Finally, 15 of the 18, and all 18 were there at VPI, were sent to Fort Benning. We went through the typical 17 weeks of training, and we were given a break because we had so much education with respect to knowing weapons and some tactics. Our being from Gettysburg was a gift too, because in ROTC most of the tactical information was about the Civil War, and we've spent a lot of time out on the battlefield. Excuse me. Our dear friend Ray Musselman, whom I mentioned earlier, caught the measles, and he was sent back a class because he missed 3 days, and that was the rule. We lost Don Singer because he fell asleep and was asked a question and he didn't know what was going on, and they immediately pulled him out of the stands and sent him overseas. By some crazy situation, while in the approach march over there, I passed Don Singer, and he was shoving a 4.2 mortar shell down a big mortar. It's called a chemical mortar. It's bigger than these 81s I talked about. Let's see. Four, five. Well, finally we got through our training, and it was wonderful. We were commissioned second lieutenants. One of the reasons I put down on the program that you have that I went from private to captain, when I got home, I was so gung-ho about, this was in July of '46 when I got home, I was so gung-ho about the 1st Division and the people that I knew there and the job we did. It was great. Dick Schlotman calls me up and he says, "Jake, let's go to California." Now, Dick Schlotman was wealthy. He had a 1941 Ford, beg pardon? Oh, 1941 Ford convertible. And I said, "You're crazy. We just got back from overseas." It was like the 15th of July. And I went to my parents and talked to them about it. They said, "It sounds like a great idea." And so I went with them, and we took 30 days. We had a blast. We wound up at Camp Joseph T. Robinson, where we trained soldiers, and just had a wonderful time. Dick Schlotman had a great influence on everything I did. That was one of them. When we finished college, or before we finished our 4th year, he said to me, "Jake, you don't want to be a doctor, do you?" And I said, "What do you have in mind?" He said, "Let's go to South America." And I said, "Who in the heck's going to send us down there, and what are we going to do when we get there?" He said, "My old man will send." He happened to be, what was he? He was in charge of all accounting for Bethlehem Steel in those days. It has a better name, but I'm getting to that stage in my life I can't say what I want. You'll know what I mean. So anyway, he said to me, we went for an interview, He asked me what I had in school. I said, well, I had German, chemistry, physics, mathematics, psychology, all that kind of stuff. He said, do you speak Spanish? No Spanish, just German. Do you have any business accounting? No business accounting. Well, for last year, take some Spanish and get all the bookkeeping that you can get or accounting, and I'll send you. Well, fine, I did it. And while Dick Schlottman was falling in love with one of the cheerleaders, and when it came time to go to South America for 2 years, he waved goodbye to me. Now, I mention that because I love the guy. He's a wonderful man, or was, I should say. Also, when I got back from South America, how did this go? Oh, it was now time for the Korean War. He calls me up. Hey, Jake, do you think we're going to be called? I said, no, we're not supposed to be called unless it's an all-out war. Well, I'm going to check and see what's going on. So he calls Second Army, gets somebody in the personnel, and he said, this is Lieutenant Schlottman, 0545-509. I'd like to know what my status is. The guy says, well, I'll have to look into it. And he said, while you're at it, check up on Jacob W. Hartman, 0545-503. Bingo, we're on orders. And it was really, anybody in here serve on the 43rd Division? I only met one. Did you really? Camp Pickett? Oh, no, well, beg pardon?
Landing. Florida.
Florida.
Camp Landing.
Was that World War I? Or II, rather? Two. Okay, I'm talking Korea now. Oh, Lordy. Am I boring you folks? Doesn't sound that way. Hang in there. That was the worst outfit I've ever seen in my life. It was unbelievable. We have one man who took his basic training and then was shipped over to Korea. They weren't even in shape. The Second Army came for the final, after maneuvers, aircraft, tanks, the whole 9 yards. Second Army came to give us the final inspection, and bingo, they flunked the whole division, and they sent most of the cadre and virtually all the officers, I think all of them, except a few who didn't have time and a few who were complaining about what was going on, like me, and they put me in charge of all the people left behind. I was told there'll be about 200, just around 200, which would make one kitchen. There were 350. They stole me blind as we were discharging them, and it was a terrible experience. But enough of that. Let's get overseas here. I'm sorry. Let's see. 5, 6. But what I did here was I got away from World War II, and I apologize for that. Eventually, we were put on orders to go overseas. It was at the Battle of the Bulge time when everybody went. Anti-aircraft soldiers, Coast Guard, anybody in a uniform. And we were all put on orders and sent overseas. We went over on the Mauritania, which was quite a ship. It was one of the great ships in the water at that time, and it went over by itself, not in a convoy. Each officer, I believe each officer, I'm not sure of that, but I know I had a group way down in the hold of the ship, and they sort of seemed to be enjoying themselves, but they were somewhat skeptical. One night, the plumbing clogged up, and there was water all over the place, and their equipment was laying in it and all that stuff. So I said, well, I'll get the plumber, and I went somewhere and asked where the plumber would be, and they gave me the room that he's in, and I go there. He's from New England, or from Britain, and I knock on the door, and he comes to the door, and he's all tired and miserable looking, and I told him what was going on, and he said, well, I'll be there at 8 o'clock. I said, 8 o'clock? Don't you know there's a war going on? Now, there's a guy from England who probably knows more about the war than I ever thought about. Then, when it came time for the mess or eating, they had stainless steel buckets in each hole, and there would be an announcement on the loudspeaker, and it would say, hole so-and-so, bring your buckets to the kitchen, and away they would go, and they'd bring it back, and then the guys would line up with their buckets and walk by with their mess kits and throw food on it, and it was sort of lousy, really, down there. And then while they're doing that, over the intercom, you'd hear, first call for officers' mess in the main dining room. Oh, and that really grabbed you if you were there with these poor guys slopping around the water and everything. And that puts officers in a bad light, I think. And that's why I put from private to captain, because I found several things. When some of my dearest friends in high school wanted nothing to do with me because I was an officer. It didn't seem fair, but that's the way it was. I cherish the experience that I have having made it. So where are we? Now we are docked at Liverpool. We march to a train. We jump in the train. We go across England to Southampton. We go in a tent. We're able to sneak out and get some beer. The next morning, we're in a very small boat. And we were wakened by depth charges. I don't know if anything was out there or not, but it got your attention. Then we went to a Camp Chesterfield and got prepared. We landed at Le Havre. And I had an experience with one of those public toilets over there. If you know what I'm talking about, I won't go into a great discourse on those toilets, but it was something. Then we went by train up to Liège, Belgium, and we went by 40 and 8. I had one of the 40 and 8s, and we had 37 men in that thing, and most of them had ratings of sergeant, corporal sergeant, staff sergeant, and so forth. And they were really upset because they knew that men were needed for replacements, and they were more afraid of having to take their rank and be assigned the job that rank called for in some infantry company, if you follow what I'm saying. Next day in Liège, I'm directed to a place where I got my carbine and 10 rounds of ammunition to zero in the carbine. And next thing I know, I'm on a truck to Aachen, where I met Colonel John Williamson, who was 3rd Battalion commander. He was a great guy. I did mention that I think heavy weapons may have saved my life. He asked me what I did in basic, and I said heavy weapons, and he signs me a heavy weapons company. Now, before getting on the ship, I was given a little manual about what you're supposed to look like when you report to your company with ammunition, compass, whatever. And I fit that or filled that to the letter. And when I got to my company, which was M Company, 18th Infantry, I got laughed at. And I earned it, apparently. So the next thing I know, I get I empty the gas mask out. They said, get rid of the gas mask. We're not in a gas war. Get rid of that. And for heaven's sakes, get out of that enlisted man's overcoat, because only the Germans wear overcoats over here. We don't. So it was a way to determine whether we're friend or enemy. So we did that, and now comes our first contact with the enemy. First of all, on a march to Bonn, we went through Nordhausen, and in that march, several V-1 missiles flew overhead. They sound like a one-cylinder motorboat, pop, 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 and they flew over maybe 100 yards high, not very high, but the command was, don't shoot, don't shoot, because if they knocked it down, they would have wiped us out, I suspect. My regiment, or my battalion, was in reserve. We were not in direct contact with the enemy. I saw my first dead GI, and it wasn't very pleasant. I believe I could still recognize the first dead German I saw, in that he was laying in a ditch, and his eyes were wide open, and nice-looking guy. But the war still didn't get to me. So we're in Bonn eventually, and my battalion did not do a lot. 1st Battalion and the 3rd Battalion did a lot, and there was one other regiment in there to take Bonn. So it was pretty dark till we got there. Next day, my company commander comes to me and he says, Hartman, we've got all kinds of ammunition. Why don't you go down and get in the bridge, the towers of the bridge that go over the Rhine, and the bridge is down, of course, and see if you can sharpen your firing adjusting. So my radio operator, a guy by the name of Clark, and I went to this tower, and we started to pick out a roof and try to blow the roof apart. Wasn't a very nice thing to do, but that's what we did. Saw my first jet there, way out, and the thing was going way out, and it was going like that. You couldn't believe with your eyes if you hadn't never seen a jet. So I'm firing away and fired quite a few rounds, and somebody didn't like it. The next thing I know, we hear a shell come in that lands between the two towers. Then the second shell comes in and lands on the other side. And I told my radio operator, even though I had no experience, let's get out of here. And we did, and I heard that 88 whine, which is goes zee boom, if you've ever heard it. I've heard that whine, and right there was a dead horse, and I dove between its legs, and sure enough, it hit that tower. We spent a couple of days in Bonn because no one was crossed the Rhine yet, but some brilliant, wonderful soldiers from the 3rd Armored Infantry, 9th Armored Infantry, excuse me, 9th Armored Infantry, a platoon leader noted that the bridge at Remagen was still up, even though it was all ready to be exploded, or imploded, or whatever you call it. And he took his men across that river and established a small beachhead, and it was soon followed by the Pennsylvania 28th Infantry Division, and then we went across. And we again were in reserve, which is the best place to be in that kind of situation. So we went into, I'm by myself basically, because I'm not at this point attached to anybody. I still belong to my company, but I'm not with them. And we were in a building, and I knew the situation on the ground. I knew that the 28th Division was over here, and the 9th Armored Infantry Division was over here, and there was no room for us. It was that small a bridgehead. So I told my radio operator, I said, I'm going to see if I can find Ray Musselman. And I put my carbine on my shoulder and started to walk. And the first unit that I came upon from the 28th was a hospital tent, and there was a doctor in there. He was a captain, and I identified myself to his satisfaction, and I said, do you know where such and such a company is? And he said, well, who are you looking for? And I said, Lieutenant Ray Musselman. And he said, I'm sorry to tell you, he was killed 3 days ago. And I never, to this day, I never recalled anything at all about walking back to my radio operator. And that still grabs me. Am I running out of time here? I seem to be mouth an awful lot here. Okay, then from there on, for a while, we crossed the Autobahn, and now I'm attached to L Company. I'm an M Company. Goes, one battalion would be A, B, C, D would be heavy weapons, E, F, G, H would be heavy weapons. They don't use J, I, K, L, M. I'm M Company. I'm in the 3rd Battalion. And we crossed the Autobahn and went up a hill into a wooded area, came to the edge of the woods, and in front of us was a group of buildings. They were farms, really. And my radio operator and I, there was about 2 squads of infantry, one section, 2 heavy machine guns that went down there. We were told to make a small combat outpost, if you will. We also had a 60 millimeter mortar observer. We got down there with no trouble. We're no sooner there than the Germans counterattacked with artillery. And at that point, the way the setup was, I should have drawn a picture, I guess, was over here is a barn, back here a little bit is the house, and my observation is on the 2nd floor, looking out toward the enemy, and then the infantry is strung out along here and across in front of this building. They're all dug in. I went over to this barn over here when this artillery thing started. Most of the shells went over us, but a few of them hit that barn, and I was between 2 cows, and I want to tell you, that was a lousy place to be. But none of our outpost was damaged. Now, I hope everyone will understand this. We had 2 heavy machine guns on the left, and the machine gun platoon leader came and told them how to set up, pull all the tracer ammunition. Every 5th round was a tracer. You could see that bullet go where it's headed, and they moved all those tracers up to the front of the belt. So if we got attacked at night, we could at least see what's going on. Now, fortunately for us, there were a number of haystacks out front. So they laid these guns on these haystacks. Before that, the 60 mortar observer and I established targets by number and a letter. And I had 6 of them. I have a map in here that shows them. So likely routes of advance of the enemy. And we could see the Germans, they were gathering down in the valley, and figured they were going to be after us before the day was over. Now, it's cold. Believe me, it's really cold. And in the basement, which was light-proof, we had a fire going, and the guys from the holes would come in. One would come in, one would stay, and get warm. It's approaching probably, in our vernacular, about 4 o'clock in the morning. It's soon going to break into daylight. The 60 mortar observer comes up to me. I'm the ranking officer in that whole mob of people, but I have no command over any of them. But nevertheless, the observers came to me and he said, "I think it's time, Lieutenant," I'm a second lieutenant at that point, to get the men out in their holes again. Well, I'm going to tell you, they went. No sooner did they get there than our machine guns open up. My radio operator and I run upstairs and look out. There's got to be 50, maybe 100, I don't know, Germans out there silhouetted against burning haystacks. The lead group of the Germans was right on a gun, and he just chopped those people to pieces. And the firing went on, and we're yelling, yelling, yelling. "Kommen Sie hier mit der Hand in the hole. Come here with your hands high." And I was trying to fire my mortars, and I was firing them, and I fired a lot of them, but they lost my targets. There was a stake in the ground somewhere that would tell them where to aim their mortar. But that was neither here nor there. We couldn't have, the Germans were so close to us, we'd had to lay on us to do any good. So now it's starting to get light. And we're yelling, yelling, yelling. I fired, honestly, 65 rounds of 30 caliber bullets during that period. And so did everybody else. They weren't aimed most of the time, you know. No. And I'd fire, and they would fire back with a burp gun. The burp gun goes, brut, 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 brut. I think they're 1,100 rounds, I'm guessing now. I'll say 1,100 rounds a minute. Our best cyclic rate with a machine gun was something like 325. Any one of you who know better could state that, but that's academic. The German weapons, for most part, were better than ours. Well, so anyway, it's getting light, and we're yelling at these guys. And eventually, one's out there about 75 yards, and he gets up, and he waves this white, used to be white rag, and comes toward, we're yelling, "Kommen Sie hier mit der Hand in the hole." So he gets fairly close, and he says, "Nicht schießen, don't shoot, nicht schießen. Ich nicht Hitler, ich Democrat." And that whole line just busted out laughing. It was so funny, and he was badly wounded. Seems sort of appropriate after last night, doesn't it? Nothing against the Democrats. Okay. Ich nicht Hitler. Next thing, we crossed the Weser River, and we spent a couple hours in the woods learning how to paddle, because we never had that in our training. So we were out in the woods on logs and getting some kind of rhythm on paddling. When we got to the river to get in these boats, we met the Navy. I thought that was weird, but that's what happened. Next thing we ran into were the Hitler Junge, and we had taken a small group of houses and looking out over wide open terrain. I'd say maybe 400 yards. Was pretty clear. And the company commander, I was now with E Company. No, L Company. He sent a platoon out over that open terrain, and they got all the way to the edge of the woods, which was a straight line across, and the Germans opened up and just mowed them down. And company commander said, "Hartman, give me some smoke." So I fired mortar rounds between our downed soldiers and the wooded area, and by darned, if these were Hitler Junge, they were anywhere from, I was told, as 14, certainly to 18 or less than that, and they came out and they executed the wounded, and it was terrible. And eventually we caught up with them and captured a few of them, and one of my, no, it wasn't mine, but one of the sergeants asked for a BAR, and he said, I'll take them back to battalion as prisoners. And he got away. He got a couple hundred yards down the way, and we heard his gun go off, and that was it. And they came back and said they tried to get away, but boy, they were angry. There was no need for what they did. So now the next one is with heavy machine. Well, I have heavy machine guns now, and we're going to take a city called Ukarath, and Ukarath is a pretty big city, and the terrain was very hilly. So the company commander, I'm attached to him. He gives me my orders. He said, "You see up there in the hill, Hartman, go up there and set up your machine guns, and you're high enough that you can fire over our head if you have to." So that's where we went, and it was up a couple hundred yards, and we were able to do some firing over their heads. Didn't hit anybody, thank the Lord. The next thing you know, there's a shell incoming in front of us, and then a second one, wasn't real fast, but a second one behind us, over our heads, in other words. So I said to my men, "Let's get that gee whiz out of here." And I went to the edge of the woods and made sure they all took off, and I passed the whole bunch going down the hill. Of course, I wasn't carrying a machine gun either. So we had a tremendous time in Ukarath. It's now pitch black dark. We're all in the basement of, the only building we have is a hospital there, and there are cadavers in bed. It's really an ugly looking place. And we hear this tank come up. Our company commander called for tanks, and he asked for a volunteer to see whether it's a German tank or our tank. And no one was volunteering. They all knew better, except me, and I agreed to do it. And I went upstairs, walked way down a hallway, perhaps from here to the far wall here, and there was an L-turn in that wall and an open door almost at ground level. On the far side of the wall, there was a doorway open, and I got to that opening, dead Germans here, and this tremendous explosion. I wind up not all the way back to this point, but maybe 30 yards. It was a German tank. Fortunately, I did pick up some shrapnel, hit me right here, but it knocked me silly didn't do anything for my head noises, I'll tell you. Then we enter the Hartz Mountains. Normally in a mountain or anywhere, you could have tanks as support, but the Germans knocked down so many trees that we had to go in there without any great support, one thing I didn't mention, the S4, which is supply, he found us every night, one way or another, with food, with water. We had a hot meal, it might be 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, hot water, fresh socks, bedrolls, ammunition. It was amazing. But in the Hartz Mountains, you couldn't do it. You had to carry your own K and C rations and stock up with those other things. That was an experience. We get in the position where we belong, and the next thing, we're getting shelled from the rear. It's our people, and we had to figure out whether or not we were on the right hill in the mountains, and we were, and we got them turned off. But that was a terrible experience, and I was offered another Purple Heart on that. One of my men picked up some shrapnel, and we had the first aid guy with us, and we got up and walked to him, and I walked into a tree. The branch sticking right out and hit me right here in the cornea. They offered me a Purple Heart. I didn't take it. Didn't seem right. When we crossed that river I told you about, we don't want to fight, and it's pitch black dark. In fact, we walked with our hands on the shoulder of the guy in front of you. And we came upon some Germans, and he did a, anybody help me on that? He diverted. He did a right turn. He wants to go this way. He did a right turn, and he'd get down under his poncho with a flashlight and a compass, and he did that several times. He'd go this way, this way, this way, that way, maybe that way, this way, till we got on what we thought was our objective. So we get there, we get up to the top of this hill, and we say, "Captain, how do you know that you're on the right at the right place?" He said, "Okay, back off the hill. Let's go down about 40 yards, everybody." And he called for a white phosphorus shell on the objective, and it hit right on the button. It's amazing how he could be that accurate. Now, we're in the Hartz Mountains. I still have machine guns. 3 young lieutenants, just commissioned. They went to OCS somewhere near Paris. And they're going to win the war. These guys were so gung-ho. They all went into E Company. And I now, with those machine guns, I think I have this mixed up a little bit, but the story's there. Day 1, first one got killed. Day 2, second one got killed. These are rifle platoon leaders. And the third day, the 3rd lieutenant was out on the flank to protect a surprise attack. And he called in, and he was shot. Psychologically, he had it. He couldn't go on, and you could understand that. It was his day to die. And sure enough, they brought him out back. Sergeant took over the platoon, and that's when I joined that.
Maria Dyak, please come to the circulation desk. Maria Dyak.
That's when I became a rifle platoon leader. Great guys. Then we got involved with the Ruhr pocket, and they said, those who know said there were probably 500,000 German soldiers in that pocket. We were coming up to close it from the south. The British were coming from the north. And that was quite an experience. And those GIs, I tell you, they were wonderful. I never got to know them. We couldn't get, you were always had 5 yards between you and the next guy. Not always, but most of the time. And eventually, the Germans were, I say we captured, but that's a stretch. They didn't want to fight. They didn't want to go through us and meet the Russians. I had 24 men in that group. This is, so help me God. We took 1,200 Germans prisoner. One of the GIs comes up to me. One of the things that was allowed was looting. The only fun you could have in the infantry, I guess. This kid comes up to me, and he's got his fist full of watches and watch fobs. He comes up to me, and he used the Lord's name in vain and said, "Gee whiz, Lieutenant, they could have beat us with their watches if they wanted to fight." And that was true. Lordy. The next unit that went through us, we sort of leapfrogged. We held our position where we advanced, and then the next unit would come up. They got 200 or 2,000, and I heard this. I was in a building then. I heard this clump, 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 clump marching, and 2 GIs on horseback were leading that mob of men. So help me God. 12. Let's see, 12. What did I say? 2,000. It's a lot of people. That's more than 2 battalions. Okay. I am lost. Let's see. We're parked there. Then it was pretty evident that the war was lost by the Germans. And in the last 3 days of the war for us, which we stopped on May the 7th, but each day, cross country, no roads, we went 40 kilometers. That's 25 miles. Wait a minute. Yeah, that's 25 miles. We did 75 miles, if you charted it out on a map, in 3 days, and we were tired. And usually the objective that we'd have was a dot on the map, and the dot on the map, you'd say, well, that's a farm. Well, the first one I hit had 600 yards of people on the, you know, and I only had 24 guys, so I put 3 in a hole, 3 in a hole, 3 in a hole, till we covered the 6, that sort of thing. But fortunately, we didn't lose anybody. So on May 7th, we are now on the other side of Cheb, Czechoslovakia. We're in a little farm town, and believe me, I cannot remember the name of that. I have that name somewhere because I just discovered all my letters. But anyway, that's where we are, and I get a call from battalion. Hartman, come up to battalion. We just got word that, I guess by now it's May the 9th and the war is officially over. We just got word that the 1st Division is going to occupy for a number of years over here till we get everybody back on their feet. And so of course I go, and Colonel Henry Middleworth, he said, Hartman, I want you, since you've been through Benning School for Boys, and you know how to yell and you know how to give orders, I want you to take all the non-coms in this battalion, all the non-coms, and take them out in the field and teach them voice and command. So that's what I did, and I did it as a Benning School for Boys. One weapon that I never touched up to that, till the time I got a company again, was a 45. Never touched it. I had my carbine, never fired an M1 in combat. Fired a lot of carbine shells. But anyway, we get out on the field, and I had lined them in 2 flanks, I guess you call it, and count off 1, 1, 2, 3, and so forth. Now I want this line, number 1, to give a command to number 1 over here, and you give the command, you execute. The first guy had a 45. I don't know why I tell this story, because technically I probably should have been in Leavenworth. I did, you know, I had all the rifles emptied, I had all the carbines emptied. I never heard of inspection arms with a 45, and that's what he gave, inspection arms. Guy whips out the 45, and he shoots the guy who gave the command right through the fleshy part here. And fortunately, I fell down the ground. I was so, that was really a terrible thing. They didn't do anything to me. I'm still here. Although there's some debate on that. You know what? I'm getting there, folks. I don't know. No, I think I left my last paper at home. Well, anyway, life goes on, and we eventually got home. I had more trouble. Let's see. Next thing, they called me down to battalion, and before I know it, I'm battalion adjutant, and that also makes you headquarters company commander. And we moved to Würzburg, Germany, where they had lots of beer and lots of cognac and lots of champagne. And I got in trouble there. Does anybody remember, it would have to be World War II, the Litchfield, I'm saying Litchfield trial in England? Litchfield was a general prisoner camp, or prison, of American GIs, officers, enlisted men, and all that, who were, some of them condemned, others, they had time of 5 years up to life, depending what they did. And Colonel Killian, I don't know where that's coming from, but that's what his name was. Colonel Killian was in charge, and they relieved him, and they sent him back to the States to A.P. Hill. They moved that prison over to the country outside of Würzburg. And it was just a bunch of wire, barbed wire, with two lengths. There would be like a pathway between the two, that sort of thing. And they had, gosh, we had three, or they had three sheds full of these prisoners. 19 were condemned. So what happened, they had their own cadre. And in this setup, which was very crude, they were losing prisoners. Every day they'd lose a prisoner. They had to march them out of that encampment to a special place for food, for the kitchen. And what they did, it was all mud, they'd go out there at night and lay in the mud, let the guys walk over them. That's what they figured anyway. And that's how they lost them. So Colonel Leonard, he was a tough monkey. He decided that he was now in command. He's in command of the regiment, and he's responsible for all such activity. So the next thing I know, I'm called down to regiment. Hartman, we want you to go to this encampment, I don't think it had a name, and take over, and don't lose anybody. And we'll relieve you every day by somebody new, because it's a rotten place. And bingo, the first day I lost somebody, one guy. And then we figured out what was going on. Then the next thing I know, the same unit, by gosh, that was supposed to be guarding these people, were riding in the back of a truck, a 2.5-ton truck, with German prisoners with a loaded rifle. So the colonel saw them, and he stopped them, and I was not at the post when that happened. I was out on some other mission, and the first sergeant took his command. It said, "Tell Hartman to send that man to our stockade." I said, "Fine." That was all. It was not a direct order. So I called this guy's colonel and told him what happened. I said, "I'm sending him to you for his toilet articles and whatever you want to give him." And then I called the colonel. "Hartman, you've had it. Next thing you know, I'm a platoon leader out in L Company, soon to be company commander of that company," which was a great, really good company. And then we moved from there to Kronach, Germany. Anybody know of Kronach? The 104th Infantry Division was there. Is this stuff of interest to everybody? Huh? Okay. This is my first go. We go there, and we have one infantry company there, and I've become the company commander. And it was good duty. Our headquarters was in a school, and in that school we had 3 Red Cross gals. Now some people say the Red Cross, I've heard people complain, soldiers complain about the Red Cross. These gals were terrific. They set up a dining area, and when one of our people had a birthday, they'd bring them down, feed them donuts. I think that's it. But they were wonderful people. I took over a big house that was something, and the 104th Division had that. They had a couple women in there to wait on the table. They had the house itself had a cook, a German cook, who had access to special foods. They had a dog robber that was a GI, and so we had a dog robber who would take care of all the communication between these people in there. It was sort of a maitre d' kind of thing. And that place became known as, my first name is Jacob, Jake's Steakhouse. And that was the pivotal point for the battalion. I was right, the headquarters was back here, my company was here, a company over here and a company over here, right up on the Russian line. And it was great duty. Then I got on orders to go to the Nuremberg. I was fortunate enough to experience that. I was also put in charge of taking 1,000 SS troopers from Nuremberg to Karlsruhe by 40 and 8. And I want to tell you, that was an experience. They gave me about almost 40 and 8s. We put a third of the troops in the front car, a third in the middle, and a third at the end. And we strung sound-powered wire the length of the train. And I told them, I said, we had automatic weapons, as automatic as we could get. I said, if you can't communicate for some reason, fire your weapons out the door, and we'll stop the train. And that did happen. And the reason they fired the weapons is one of our guys was running by the train, and one was leaning out to help him, and apparently it was a pole that caught him and knocked him out of the car. And well, anyway, we got the train stopped, and the guy survived. We weren't moving fast at that point. So we got to Karlsruhe, and each car had a box with the names in, and I told my sergeant, I said, Sergeant, don't let anybody out of these carts until I check with the French, and we make sure that we have what we are supposed to have in each car. Well, while I was in there talking to them, they just overwhelmed our guys and emptied the cars and then told me we lost 2 men. But that ended there. I had no problem with that. Oh, wow. Big mouth. I think that's about it, folks. I could go on, I guess, for another year. But thank you.
Maybe we could have a few questions, but I wanted to put a remark in before too many people leave. We have a donation jar in the back that needs some refilling. We do have expenses, and a couple of dollars from each of you would cover it, but some people don't have a couple of dollars, so if you